and welcome to the Built Heritage Committee meeting for September 12th, 2023. I'd like to call the members to order. This hybrid meeting is being facilitated through Zoom and is being held on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, the original custodians of the unceded land in which the City of Ottawa is located. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Members are reminded to submit any motions they might have, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest opportunity. Although the deadlines have passed for residents to register to speak and provide written submissions to this committee, residents may still make written submissions to council. The reports considered today will be submitted to Ottawa City Council on September 27th, 2023. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. Currently, I've received no regrets. Could the committee coordinator please call the roll? A reminder to members to unmute themselves when they're called.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Member Doty.
Here.
Member Quinn.
Present.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Member Madigan.
Here.
Councillor Lee.
Good morning.
Member Legault.
Here.
Vice Chair Plount.
Ici.
Chair King.
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you so much. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, are the minutes of Tuesday, July 11th, 2023 confirmed? Confirmed, thank you. Our first order of business is an application for demolition and new construction at 230 232 Lisgar Street, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I'd ask staff to provide a presentation.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. Before us is an application to demolish 230 and 233 Lisgar Street. And sorry, I'll just wait for the slides to pop up. So before us is an application to demolish 230 and 233 Lisgar Street and construct a new 9-story apartment building, residential building. The properties are designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Centertown Heritage Conservation District. Next slide, please. The subject properties are outlined in red on this slide. They are located on the northern edge of the HCD boundary, situated on the south side of Lisgar Street, west of Metcalfe Street, and east of O'Connor Street. Each property contains a 2.5-story front gable house clad in brick, constructed circa 1888. And they're situated immediately east of 3 other similarly scaled front gable houses, south of a 12-story apartment building, and west of an 8-story apartment building. Next slide, please. These images show the existing conditions of the streetscape and vicinity, with the subject properties shown in red on the left image. You can see that they contain setbacks and heights consistent with the first period of development in the Heritage Conservation District. 230 Lisgar Street on the left has been altered with a 2-story front addition that obscures most of the building's original architectural elements. Next slide, please. As part of this proposal, the applicant proposes to demolish the 2 existing dwelling units, which are both considered character supporting resources and contributing properties within the Heritage Conservation District. The HCD plan contemplates the demolition of certain character supporting resources, provided that their removal achieves broader city building goals and that the replacement building is consistent with the HCD plan's new construction guidelines. As per guidelines for the demolition of contributing buildings in the plan, the applicant has provided an analysis that demonstrates that 230 Lisgar Street has been altered to the extent where its cultural heritage value to the HCD in its current form is compromised by an unsympathetic two-story front addition. That the new building will carry forward some of the perceived attributes of both 230 and 232 Lisgar Street. And that the new building is consistent with the guidelines for new construction and contributes to the city's broader city building goal of intensification. Further, as conditions to the recommendation to demolish the buildings, the applicant will be required to deposit photographs and research material related to the site's existing buildings to the City of Ottawa archives. Next slide, please. The proposed 49-unit building is 9 stories in height. The first image on the slide here on the left is the front elevation as seen from Lisgar Street. Here we see the massing, which consists of 3 distinct vertical bays and includes a 3-story podium and further step back at the 9th floor. The middle image is of the site plan, and here we see that the proposed building is set back 5.8 meters from the street, providing a transition between the existing building to the east, which protrudes closer to the street, and the existing building to the west, which is further recessed from the street. We also see the soft-scaped rear yard amenity space, the vehicular access to the underground parking garage via car elevator, a landscaped front yard inclusive of new plantings, entranceway, and a seating area adjacent to the main entrance. And then the last image on the right there is a close-up on some of the proposed materiality, which consists of red brick cladding on all elevations with perforated metal accents on selected brick returns that mimic some of the decorative patterns found on 232 Lisgar Street's existing woodwork. Next slide, please. Here we have a streetscape elevation along Lisgar Street, demonstrating how the proposed building will interact with the street. The front yard setback will allow for a landscaped entrance plaza that reflects the front porch characteristic of Centertown and eliminates the existing paved condition. The building's massing, which employs stepbacks on the 4th and 9th stories, will allow adjacent historic houses to the west to remain prominent along the streetscape and to maintain continual datum lines along the row. The 3 distinct vertical bays and windows will help maintain the streetscape's historic rhythm and provide a successful transition to the neighboring property. And lastly, its red brick and perforated metal detailing mimic materiality that honor the residential character of the HCD. Next slide, please. Staff are of the opinion that this proposal complies with the Centertown HCD policies and guidelines as they relate to demolition and new construction, and the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada. In staff's opinion, the proposal employs several design interventions to ensure that it contributes to the cultural heritage value of the HCD while achieving the broader city goal of providing additional housing units. Next slide, please. In terms of consultation, the application submission materials were posted on the city's development application search tool. Heritage Ottawa, neighbors within 30 meters, Chair King and Councillor Troster were notified of the application. And the Centertown Community Association is also aware of the application and participated in the pre-consultation process. Next slide, please. In conclusion, staff are recommending approval for the proposed demolition of 230 and 232 Lisgar Street and of the construction of a new 9-story building on the properties. And as conditions of approval, staff are requesting that the applicant deposit photographs and research material related to the site's existing buildings to the City of Ottawa archives prior to issuing demolition permits, that the applicant provide samples of all final exterior materials, including details on the proposed decorative metal patterns for approval by heritage planning staff prior to the issuance of the building permit. Staff are also requesting that authority be delegated for minor design changes that might arise and that the heritage permit be approved with a 3-year expiry date. Next slide, please. And that concludes this presentation.
Thank you so much for that detailed presentation. We did receive correspondence on this item from Heritage Ottawa, from David Fleming in support. We have a number of registered speakers, including the application team. Would you like to provide a presentation?
Sure, if the committee would like.
I don't see any specific interest for a presentation, so. So, we can move forward here if there are any questions. Are there any specific questions for the applicant team?
Hi there. Thanks for being here and thanks to Heritage staff. I mean, I think it's a beautiful building. I think it'll look wonderful on the streetscape. I just have a question. Could you remind me of how many bachelor, 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms you're intending for this space? And how big the largest apartments are? You can estimate, that's okay.
Sorry, thank you. I would say a rough estimation would be current with market trends. So there is going to be a slant towards smaller units, towards 1 bedroom units. I believe the final tally was around 70% 1 bedrooms to 30% 2 bedroom units. We do have larger 2 bedroom units towards the top of the building. I believe the largest unit is around 950 square feet.
Okay, thank you. I mean, once again, I'm just going to point out that this is a trend. Quite often we see the demolition of what used to be family homes, or at least homes that were split up into 2 or 3 larger apartments to be replaced with much smaller ones. And one of the under-discussed elements of Heritage is how Heritage can sometimes preserve quasi-affordable housing stock. And we do lose something in terms of built heritage when we lose this kind of rental stock, which has characterized Centertown for decades. Again, I'm prepared to support staff's recommendation. I think the architects have done a beautiful job on this building. But again, this is a trend that revitalization and intensification also do lead to displacement in our neighborhoods and a loss of larger family style apartments. But that said, I really do appreciate the work of staff and the work of the applicant to make this building fit into the neighborhood. And from what I can tell, folks are quite pleased with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. I see that Member Legault has a question.
Hi. It's really quite a beautiful building, and well, it's no longer on the screen, but I think you guys have done a really great job of connecting the massing of the building to the adjacent property. And it's very clear, especially with 230 Lisgar, that building has lost a lot of its character defining elements, and perhaps 232 Lisgar is the building with more value, and you are trying to address some of its character defining elements through replicating that fascia detail, like the detailing of that through perhaps the CNC new, I'm not sure what you're calling it, but on the new building, and then you're doing the red brick. I mean, I guess I don't have any issue with this building, and I support the City of Ottawa's recommendation, but I would like to talk about sort of this in terms of like the macro scale of how this is kind of eroding, like slowly chipping away at the heritage character or the cultural landscape of the street. Like, you guys are demolishing 2 of the 6 residential homes in this sort of area. And I know it's represented in adjacent streets in the neighborhood. But it's, to me anyways, like the property beside, I think it's 250 or 234. Then there's a parking lot, and then there's another house, and then a very tall building. So it kind of scares me a little bit, like, is that next parking lot with 234 going to become another 10-story building? What's going to happen across the street to that oak tree, which is just one building with a parking lot in beside? And I think we kind of need to look at this in terms of how it's affecting the big picture. And that's not for you guys to address, right? That's for us as citizens of the City of Ottawa to talk about. But I do think that this is kind of representative of this chipping away, of the cultural fabric of this particular area. So I just wanted to note that.
Thank you for those comments. Member Madigan.
Yes, thank you. Again, it's a great intervention into the neighborhood and the city. I think it's going to contribute to the district, unfortunately at the cost of demolishing a couple of heritage buildings. I was going to raise some of the points that the member had raised about the sort of tearing away of the heritage fabric of the district. This is the edge. Some substantiation for permitting the demolition and replacement of the buildings is that it was at the edge of the heritage district. But if we keep losing sort of those buildings, how do we define the edge of the heritage district? Again, this is a wired question. I hope in the future that the rationale used just for this site does not go forward to say the neighboring buildings then become sacrificial for the same reasons. This is a greater picture. This goes beyond sort of the project. But to your project, in the trace report in supplemental information, there was a statement about recording, I'm paraphrasing a bit, recording and also commemoration of the buildings that are there. Now, there's mention of the recording aspect of it. Was any more thought given to how to commemorate the existing buildings further?
I would state that the commemoration that we would be giving these existing buildings would be through the detailing that we're going to be applying to the podium levels. So that would be through the treatment to the metal panels that are on the return side. And the scale of the podium levels as well. So the scale for the podium, for the massing of the building, we brought down from where it was originally to more closely replicate the height of the existing buildings that are on site and the adjacent buildings, and the widths of these elements as well. Right, they work with the same width to create similar cadence with the width of the existing housing stock that's on the site right now. So we're making reference to the mass and basically to the footprint of the buildings that occupied the site currently. And then we're making reference to the detailing that we found in those fascias and other treatments, the brickwork, in the way that we're looking at the masonry detailing for the project as well. So they are, subtle cues, but at the same time, as we look to redevelop the site with greater density, there are some concessions that we have to make. And so the idea here is that we're certainly respectful of the footprint that we've got, and that we're trying to leave some clues behind for what was here before this building was constructed.
That does go towards making the building fit in and draw from the existing heritage and site to inform the design. When I think of commemoration, I'm thinking of aspects of interpretive plaque, perhaps salvaging features of the building and installing perhaps in a lobby, for example, if the barge board that inspired the perforated panel was salvaged and put there with a plaque saying this is from the original house and this relates to, for example, the detailing of the building. That's to me an aspect of how you would commemorate to help interpret the site for people coming to that area and help maintain that history of the edge of the district as well.
Right, and this is certainly something we could investigate. I mean, there's quite a bit that would have to go into salvaging, portions of the existing building and ensuring that they were salvageable. But we could certainly investigate carefully removing certain components to be preserved and then displayed or used in the new building.
Because the perforated panel is a very subtle reference to the barge board detail. I really appreciate that as in like a contemporary interpretation of that in a different material. If it could have been brought to the front of the building as well, where that detail is present on the building. The use of red brick maintains the continuity of the existing material, but part of the heritage of brick masonry is not just it's the red brick, which you can have a series of red brick houses. It's that additional little detailing that gives the expression of the craftsmanship, the sort of additional efforts of the mason and also the builder. So it's just the little edges. The corbelling, the accents around the windows. Some of the background information provided to the project does read that there's an effort to do that. Perhaps a bit more effort or taken along to put some more details in to allow the mason to, express their craftsmanship a bit further. That's a thought. There's these two buildings relate to each other in that the window and the gable actually has a different shape from what's usually common for this period of building. Very perhaps a distinctive detail for the builder or designer of the house. Perhaps that's if there's still a latitude to tweak the design, to take inspiration from the shape of that window to create a panel in the brickwork. To me, that's an aspect of pointing out things that are distinct about these buildings that make them different from the other buildings. Anyway, those are my comments. Again, I appreciate the effort into the design. I think it does fit into the district and contributes to the district and the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Madigan. Are there any more questions? A follow-up question from Member Legault.
Sorry, just one other thing, I guess, in the same vein of what Member Madigan is saying in terms of retention and documenting these buildings before they are demolished. I think that it would be especially relevant if possible. I don't know what the interior condition is of these buildings, but at 230 Lisgar, if there is any evidence of what that original facade was behind that two-story brick addition, that should certainly be documented as well. And coming at this from a completely different angle, I'm not sure if there's a program within the city of Ottawa of any sort of salvage materials, but certainly that rubble stone foundation, those stones would probably be much higher value than what we can get out of our quarries now. So if that can be repurposed in sort of a respectful way, I think that that would be very strongly encouraged in terms of the standards and guidelines, but also just in terms of a practical point of view.
Thank you for those comments. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much. We also have David Fleming registered for Heritage Ottawa. Just wanted to see, David, if you needed to make comment if the committee was willing to pass this application. Thank you so much. Does the committee have any questions for staff? Seeing none, do any of the members have any further comments on this item? Seeing none, is the report carried?
Carried.
Thank you. This report will be submitted to the Planning and Housing Committee on September 20th, 2023 for consideration. Our next item is an application to alter Somerset House, 352 Somerset Street West, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act and located in the Centretown Heritage Conservation District. I'll invite staff to give a presentation on this application.
Okay, good morning, members of committee. We're here today to, oh, I see the English version is not up yet, but maybe that's okay. Sure, I'll just wait a minute. Thank you. Good morning, members of committee. We're here today to, in front of you is an application to alter Somerset House at 352 Somerset Street West, a property I'm sure you're familiar with. It's designated under Part 5 of the Heritage Act and located in the Centretown HCD. Next slide. Some context, it's located prominently at the intersection, the southeast corner of Somerset and Bank Street in Centretown. Next slide. Some context and some history on the property. It was constructed in 1896 as a department store. In 2007, as part of a renovation project, the building partially collapsed and has remained vacant and deteriorated ever since. It is subject to multiple Building Code Act orders, notices of violation, and property standard orders. It is listed on the city's heritage watch list and is monitored regularly by city staff. Next slide. These are some photos of the property showing it in its current condition. And you can see the deteriorated condition, especially at the rear of the building to the east. Next slide. In 2002, Heritage staff brought forward a report to BHC to provide an update and the high-level cost estimate for the immediate urgent work to be undertaken on the building, should the city move to undertake the work. The city has not had to undertake any of the work, as the most critical work was found to not be immediately necessary, and the owner has been working towards compliance with the orders. Some of the work that has been completed on the building recently includes installation of additional lateral braces in the basement, repointing of an interior brick wall and pier elements, infilling of the floor openings, and removal of debris. Also in these photos, you can see the restoration of the metal cornice at the street level. Next slide. In front of you, I think the applicant is here today to do an overview of the proposal, but it basically will be a mixed-use building with 2 commercial units and 14 residential units. It includes the restoration and stabilization of the historic building and the construction of a 3-story addition at the back, the east of the building. Next slide. So some of the rehabilitation elements that will happen: the restoration of the metal cornices and corner turret, replacement of the windows on the 2nd and 3rd story with aluminum windows, repair and repointing of brick, and replacing damaged brick where necessary. Next slide. This I'm just flagging, it's sort of an interesting component of the rehabilitation, and it's based on historic evidence. It's the reinstatement of the bay windows on the 2nd and 3rd story of the Bank Street facade, and the restoration of the original commercial storefront of the property, including the large windows, the signboards, and those components. Next slide, thanks. This is a rendering showing the addition. You can see it's a flat roof structure clad in brick and glazing. It's delineated from the historic building by a glass curtain wall. There's secondary cornices that wrap around the east and north facade. And you can see that 3-bay rhythm is sort of echoed on that, on the addition. Next slide. Staff have reviewed the proposal and have determined that it meets the Centertown and Minto Park HCD plan, as well as the applicable standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places. Next slide. And then staff are recommending of approval of the application subject to quite a few conditions. So the first is the implementation of the conservation measures in the heritage impact assessment. Those conservation measures will detail the specific restoration pieces that happen to each element of the building. So we wanted to make sure there was a clear understanding of that. The applicant will submit reports monitoring the condition of the structure once the construction starts. We'll ask for material samples for any new material to be used, and then the submission of a construction schedule, which will help our colleagues in Building Code Services with their monitoring of the structure and to understand what work is happening when. Next slide. And then finally, just a couple additional points on some of the structural monitoring that is happening, because obviously that's a concern or interest that's top of mind for everybody. The applicant has submitted a design intent report with this application that details the rehabilitation approach to the building, as well as the approach to the seismic upgrades. That document's been reviewed by our colleagues in Building Code Services. It will be subject to a complete engineering review as part of the building permit application. And it will, once construction starts, it will be subject to increased inspections on the site throughout the process, at the discretion of the chief building official. Next slide. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. We do have the applicant team registered to speak. Did you indicate that they were going to provide a presentation?
They have one prepared and are ready to speak, but it's at committee's discretion.
So is there any interest amongst the committee to have a presentation from the applicant? I don't see any interest there. So are there any questions to the applicant team? And I see that Councillor Troster has raised her hand.
Hi, thanks for being here. It's nice to see you again. I'm just wondering if the applicant team can speak to the implementation of the recommendations in the Robertson Martin Conservation Report from 2022. Or maybe staff could help.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Thank you, Counselor. So the Robertson Martin Report was a document that the city commissioned to support the June 2022 report that came to this committee. So it outlined all the immediate urgent work that would have to happen if the city was to undertake the work. We can't, it's a city document. We can't require the applicant to use it. But what we did do, and you'll see in the Heritage Impact Assessment, is that it's a reference document for the Heritage Impact Assessment. So the Heritage Impact Assessment referenced that document and then sort of implemented a lot of the pieces of it into the conservation elevations and conservation approach. And that's what we've tied them to through the recommendation, the first condition.
Great. Well, we all know there's an understandable level of skepticism in the community. It's been 17 years that this building has been sitting derelict, and it's been a real eyesore, and it's the building I hear the most about in the neighborhood. I guess my first question is, what guarantees do we have that this will actually happen? My understanding is that this is the third iteration that has come to Heritage Committee in 17 years. Either the applicant or Heritage staff are welcome to answer.
I think I can answer that, Councillor. I've been involved in the project since 2016, so we've been involved for 2 iterations. One of the iterations that we did in 2017, one of the issues that came up was there was a big question about seismic capability of the Heritage Building, and there was a big conflict between the engineering staff and city engineering staff that helped to derail that previous submission. It's my belief that my client has a definite intention to proceed with the project. We've submitted for building permit. And we're hopeful to start construction, I've been told this year, as long as the permit's received, I was told like by mid-October. If not, it would wait till the new year. There are some, I don't want to say concerns in the lack of sophistication of the client in terms of dealing with building construction issues. But we're hopeful that those things will be kind of addressed as we go through the process with the city, and Heritage staff have been very helpful in understanding that it's a building being done by a private, not even developer, a private individual. They don't have the necessary technical resources of, let's say, a building that would be done with taxpayer funded resources. But there's a definite intent to replicate what the images are on the screen and to produce the building that the city would be very happy to have completed.
Thank you very much. I mean, I keep saying perfect is the enemy of good, and I think the community is just desperate to see something developed on this site. I think it's a very handsome design. Could it be more ambitious? Absolutely. But I think the community just wants to see it move forward. And I just wanted to take the chance to thank and give credit to Heritage, Planning, Bylaw, OPS. They've been working on this file for 17 years. Long before me, and also previous councillors McKenney and Holmes have been involved. So I hope that this is the beginning of the end, or the beginning of the beginning for Somerset House. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm choosing to remain cautiously optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Member Madigan.
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate this project going ahead. Hopefully, it's I've been around here for this long, and I recall the building falling down, unfortunately, and the efforts to try and preserve it, rebuild it. So, project has great potential. Hopefully, it will happen. One question, I'm not sure who to direct this question to. The building part that fell down had a mural on it, and I don't know if that was ever discussed to bring that back or the equivalent, or.
Thank you, Member Madigan. I don't think it's something that has been considered to this point, but it's certainly something we can take away and discuss. So thanks for flagging it.
Again, I don't know the history of murals, just that usually in cities, murals put on buildings usually go through a whole process and there's some significance to it, also just the artistic mirrors. So if we're recreating that aspect of the building, is the mural something that should be considered to be put back up there by the same artist or a similar sort of thing? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Madigan. Member Dote.
Thank you, Chair. I would a question for, I think, the staff probably. First question is, do you know when the bay windows were changed to the other windows that are there at the moment?
Member Dote, can you repeat the question? You're not coming in clear, maybe closer to just be closer to the microphone, but we're getting a bit of an echo in the committee room.
Am I audible now? Is it better?
Yes, it's better now.
Okay. First question that I had was, do we know when the bay windows were changed to what the windows are now? I'm going to type in. Can I type in the question?
Thank you, Member. I think I heard the question is, when were the bay windows on the Bank Street facade changed originally? I don't think we have the date of when they were changed, but the rehabilitation would be working off of historic evidence that was some of the earlier photos of the building that I think are from, I want to say the 1920s, but I'm not sure if I remember that date correctly. But so the bay windows were part of the original construction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions? Okay. Member Quinn.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to staff and all of the people involved in this project. As a member of the former Built Heritage Subcommittee, I'm certainly familiar with this site. I think this is the third time a plan for its rehabilitation has been that I've seen. So like Councillor Trotter, I have a degree of skepticism. I'd like to remain cautiously optimistic as well. But I would like to ask, I did note that the city has chosen not to undertake the recommended work in the Robertson Martin report because, quote, it's not immediately necessary. And I'm just wondering, as this process evolves, is there, with potential delays and potential problems that result in, again, nothing advancing with this site, is there a plan to continue thoroughly monitoring the site so that should the time come where the city does feel it is necessary to make some of those important recommended stabilizing, some of that stabilizing work that it is prepared to step in to undertake that to undertake the work. So is there a plan around that?
Thank you, Member Quinn, for the question. Yes, the answer is yes. The building will continue to be monitored by Building Code Services. They receive monthly reports from Art Engineering, who's the engineer of record on the site right now, and they report back to our colleagues in Building Code Services, and that will certainly continue to happen. If construction is delayed over the winter, measures will be taken to ensure that it remains safe over the winter. And the work that was found to not be immediately necessary had to do with the foundation. There was not as much underpinning required as originally thought. And then it was sort of that in conjunction with the owner undertaking work as well. So it was sort of the two-part, like the installation of lateral braces in the basement and the repointing of the stone wall in the basement. So it was the combination of the two that led to the city not undertaking the work and seeing some momentum and progress on the file. But yes, it will continue to be monitored.
Okay, thank you for providing that detail. I appreciate it. Thanks. That's all I had.
Thank you, Member Quinn. Member Legault.
Yes, I'm not sure who is best to answer this, but I just kind of had some clarifications about how you guys see this project, I guess, in terms of the standards and guidelines in your mind. So while a few things before I get to that, one, I think it's excellent you guys are putting that turret back in. I think that's wonderful. It's going to be a beacon. People are going to see it. And that was the first thing I noted. And I think that's great. That's a great restoration project. So in terms of the building as a whole, though, you have a few different standards listed. You have some standards from preservation, you have some standards from rehabilitation, and then also restoration. So as I see it, the actual main existing part of the building is going to be a restoration project, with the exception of that back wall, which is going to have to be rebuilt. But those existing exterior walls, those are going to remain as the existing wall assembly, right? Okay, great. And then that back rear addition is going to be the rehabilitation aspect. Are the heating and cooling systems going to be like throughout the whole thing? Or I guess I'm curious about the actual authenticity of that front portion of the building. I think it's great that the continued use is it's going to be retail space, so people can go in, similar to the fact that it was a department store, and experience it. I just wonder if that authentic experience of what they would have had before this will still exist.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. There is an intention in terms of the design of the interior of the building, like for the residential units, the units that are in the heritage portion of the building, all their kitchen exhaust and washroom exhaust is all going to go to the roof, so we don't have those ugly little louvers on the front of the building. And the new portion, they will go out to the street. But in the heritage portion, we're going to try and retain that heritage character. In terms of the interior of the building, most of the existing brick walls, because it's a triple white brick wall on the exterior, they're going to be retained. So there'll be, if you have a unit on the second floor that faces Somerset Street, there'll be a brick wall that's retained as in situ as per the original design. We won't be covering those walls up. That'll be on the Somerset facade, on the bank facade, and on the facade facing to the south.
That's wonderful. So in that case, I would encourage the city staff to add minimal intervention standard 3 as one of like the primary standards that's being applied to this, just so that we can all understand that this isn't like a Disney building, right? Like, we're not faking that this is a replication of the past and we don't have insulation in those walls. It's just it's a triple width brick. It's done right, and we're really conserving that value. And then the rehabilitation part is that rear addition. Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councillor Leeper.
Just very briefly, in anticipating some of the discussion that I know will probably be engendered by this fairly high profile project in the community, is our decision today as a committee, does that hinge on whether or not we have any guarantee that this work will actually move forward? What is the criteria by which we need to make a decision today?
Thank you, Member Leeper. I think the committee's decision today is on the application that's in front of you. It's for the addition to the building and the restoration of the historic building. Staff aren't able to provide any sort of guarantee that this will happen. So we're very hopeful it does. And like Richard mentioned, there's some tangible signs that it is moving forward in terms of having the site plan application submitted and the zoning submitted, and the building permit drawings are in for review. Some work has been done on the building, so there are signs of progress, but there's no guarantee we can provide. We can show what's in front of you, show some of the momentum that's in place, and then sort of speak to Member Quinn's question about the monitoring, what will happen if it doesn't happen. But what's in front of committee today is the application.
So if this meets the criteria by which we determine whether or not a alteration of a building. If it meets that, then it's really incumbent on us to vote for approval today. This is coming before Planning and Housing Committee for a rezoning.
Yes, that's correct. On September 20th, it will be at the meeting for a rezoning application.
Okay, and is that, I'm sorry, I think the agenda is up and I believe that's coming forward with a staff recommendation in favor of approval.
Yes, yep, that's right. This report will be in front of Planning Committee at the same time, so they'll be considered concurrently.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you so much for making yourself available for questions. We also have David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa also registered as a speaker. Just wanted to see whether you wanted to speak or whether it was necessary to speak if the committee moves forward and approves this application.
Not necessary, but I would like to speak.
Well, we would invite you up. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Fleming, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heritage Ottawa first made a presentation about this property to Planning and Development Committee and City Council in November and December of 2007, nearly 16 years ago. At that time, we were concerned about the possible demolition of the building following a workplace accident that destroyed a significant portion of the structure. Luckily, over the years, this poster child for heritage demolition by neglect, which has survived thanks to numerous engineering plans and city work orders directing the owner to stabilize the remaining portions of this building, is before us again. City work orders directing the owner to stabilize the remaining portions of the building, and now for a third time you are being asked to consider a development application to alter this property. Both the planning rationale and the heritage impact assessment in general support the proponent's recommendation to stabilize, rehabilitate, and expand on the existing remnants of the building. We find this to be an appropriate design and in keeping with the plans, guidelines, and policies of the Centertown and Minto Park Heritage Conservation District. However, before further renovation and new construction can proceed, it is essential that city staff make it a priority that they, in conjunction with and with the cooperation of the applicant, abide by the 56 urgent and short-term measures for the remediation and stabilization of the existing building, as noted in the conservation guidelines prepared by Robertson Martin Architects in March of 2022, before any further renovation and new construction can proceed. We also urge the city and the owner to consider the alternative strategies as outlined in section 6.0 of the Heritage Impact Statement by Commonwealth Historic Resource Management. In light of the above, we support this application and look forward to the completion of the stabilization and new construction of this welcome addition to the residential and commercial life of Centertown. We recommend that the committee approve the staff recommendations for this application. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Are there any questions for Mr. Fleming? Councillor Troster.
I just want to thank you and Heritage Ottawa and the Community Association and every other group that has been working on this file since 2007. We really do appreciate your contributions, and I hope that my optimism is not for naught, that we can finally see this this property developed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you so much. I see no other questions, so thank you, Mr. Fleming. Does the committee have any other questions for staff? Seeing none, do any of the members have any other additional comments on this item? I don't see any, so I'll just also add some brief comments. I commiserate with Councillor Troster, with the residents of Somerset Ward. After 17 years, both the community and the city expects expedited progress on this property. The city has been anxious to save Somerset House, and I was involved in some of those conversations in the last term of council. And I know that we've had multiple departments, agencies, community associations involved in this site. And I think that today is a positive step, but we're only cautiously optimistic because there's been plenty of talk, but what residents now expect is action. I'd really like to thank staff for the fact that they have ensured that conditions have been placed on this application. We heard that those conditions include the implementation of the conservation measures identified in the Heritage Impact Assessment, the applicant submitting reports monitoring the condition of the historic structure from a professional engineer with heritage experience to the satisfaction of heritage planning and building code services, the applicant providing material samples for any material to be used on the historic building and exterior materials for the addition to heritage staff satisfaction, and the submission of a construction schedule to the satisfaction of staff in heritage planning and building code services. At this point, it's important that the applicant move forward. We've seen multiple people from the community. We've seen city staff moving forward with actions to save Somerset House. It's now incumbent upon the applicant himself to work towards saving Somerset House. And the city is committed to preserving the heritage architecture and working with the applicant. So we really do encourage the applicant to work with the city and to work with the community. Is the report carried? Carried. Thank you so much. This report will be submitted to the Planning and Housing Committee on September 20th, 2023 for consideration. The next item before us is designation of Highland Park Lawn Bowling Club at 439 Golden Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Can staff please provide a presentation?
Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Taylor Quibel, and today I will be giving a brief presentation on staff's recommendation to issue a notice of intention to designate the Highland Park Lawn Bowling Club under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide. The property is located in the Highland Park neighborhood in Ward 15. The property has a large lawn bowling green and a 1.5-story clubhouse with outbuildings fronting Byron, Golden, and Ravenhill Avenues. The club's prominent location on a corner and large manicured grass bowling green in front of the clubhouse makes it a recognizable landmark in the community. The property can be seen outlined in blue on this slide. Next slide. The designation of properties in Ottawa is guided by the provincial policy statement, the Ontario Heritage Act, and the city's official plan. Additionally, Ontario Regulation 0906 outlines the criteria for determining cultural heritage value or interest. Recent changes to the Ontario Heritage Act via Bill 23 allow properties to be designated if they meet 2 or more of the 9 criteria specified in this regulation. Our assessment indicates that this property satisfies 6 out of the 9 criteria. In 2022, City Council listed this property on the city's Heritage Register. However, under the implications of Bill 23, the property would be removed from the register unless Council issues a notice of intention to designate it by December 31st, 2024. Furthermore, in 2022, City Council instructed staff to conduct a thorough analysis of properties in Ward 15 that are already listed on the city's Heritage Register, with the aim to proactively designate them under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. This directive, coupled with the amendments brought about by Bill 23, has led staff to review all listed properties in Ward 15. Next slide. Now we'll speak to the property's cultural heritage value. So the property consists of a large lawn bowling green, a 1.5-story clubhouse, and outbuildings. The clubhouse, built in 1914, has a simple design typical of early 20th century sports facilities. It features white siding with green accents and exhibits characteristics of early 1900s lawn bowling clubhouse. Despite several alterations, the property maintains its form and purpose. It represents an early 20th century lawn bowling club with a spacious green and a functional clubhouse. 439 Golden Avenue also has historical significance in Ottawa's sport and society history. It reflects the popularity of sports and recreational clubs during the emergence of the middle class. The club was integral to the Highland Park community's development and served as a social hub. The Highland Park Lawn Bowling Club also has associations with significant individuals and organizations contributing to the sport's success provincially and nationally. The property also has contextual value as the club supports the character of Highland Park as an early 20th century suburb. Its design, location, and integration with the neighborhood make it a notable landmark, preserving the area's historic character. Next slide. This slide lists the property's identified heritage attributes as listed on the property's statement of cultural heritage value. The prominent prominent attributes include the modest understated form and 1.5-story massing of the clubhouse. It also includes the clubhouse's orientation and the large open lawn bowling green. The interior is excluded from the designation. Next slide. In terms of consultation, the property owner is aware of the proposed designation, as is Heritage Ottawa, the Westboro Community Association, Chair King, and Ward Councillor Lieber. Both the owner and councillor are in support of the proposed designation. Next slide. In conclusion, staff's evaluation has determined that Highland Park Lawn Bowling Club meets 6 of the 9 criteria required for designation of a property under the Ontario Heritage Act, and therefore this item recommends that the Built Heritage Committee recommend that council issue a notice of intention to designate the property under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act in accordance with the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value. Next slide. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that excellent report. We did receive correspondence on this application from Heritage Ottawa, and David Fleming from Heritage Ottawa is also registered to speak. I just wanted to ask David once again whether he would be interested in speaking on this item or not if this item were to pass. Thank you so much. Does the committee have any questions for staff?
Not in the vein of questions, but I just want to thank staff very much for getting this done. It has been on the to-do list since my first term of council, and I know that you are bombarded with work in the wake of Bill 23, and I appreciate your making the time for this. I also appreciate the work of Stephanie in my office, who has been shepherding this along, as well as the members of the community who I understand have been very helpful in providing some valuable research on the background for this building. I very much obviously support the designation. I had a great conversation yesterday with actually former councillor David Chernyshenko about understanding the history of Ottawa through sport. Who gets to play? Where do they play? What do they play? A lot of really profound insights about the history of our city can be gleaned from the games that we played, and I'm curious to hear more from him in the coming months about that. But I think it's important that we preserve some of these physical touchstones. Residents know that the Granite Curling Club has now disappeared from Kitchissippi Ward, and that has practical implications for our 15-minute neighborhood community, but it also has historical connotations. It was at after a game of shinny between some of Ottawa's most influential people a few years ago at the Granite Club that the decision was made, let's pursue the Ottawa Senators. Right? There's a lot of sports history in Kitchissippi, and we're losing it. we're losing that physical manifestation of it. And I think the preservation of the Highland Park Lawn Bowling Club is critical to stemming loss of at least some of that history. So thank you for your work.
Thank you so much, Councillor Leeper, for those comments. Member Madigan.
Thank you. I really appreciate the presentation and support the application. You used the term landmark. Did you have much pushback in describing this site as a landmark by other people considering it?
Pushback from who, sorry?
Well, use the term landmark when, for most people, whether your architecture or landmark usually connotates something more prestigious, very, very much in your face, not necessarily in your face, but prominent and so on and so forth. I recall from a project I worked on, we're replacing sort of a more common building, which in some respects could be considered landmark in its own way, that other proponents were considering something more dramatic. And I was wondering if you had sort of pushback on calling this a landmark. I think it's a good explanation of that. A landmark, it's more than just a big, large, prestigious building. There's more to being a landmark, and I think this site sort of gives an example of that, which is important to understand that. And I just know from my own experience when people talk about landmarks, there's certain expectation, and you don't have to have that big prominent building or site to be a landmark, and this, I think, fulfills that for the community.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there. It's more about a community landmark. This was actually the entrance of Highland Park when it was Highland Park, and it's kind of a way to like situate yourself at the entrance of the community. And today, as it fronts all three avenues, it remains a landmark in the community.
I'll be definitely using this as an example in the future when I have future debates about what a landmark site or building should be. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that question and those comments. Are there any more questions for staff or any other comments on this application? Seeing none, is the report carried? Carried, thank you. So this report will be submitted to Ottawa City Council on September 27th, 2023 for consideration. The next item before us is a status update on Built Heritage Committee inquiries and motions for the period ended August 25th, 2023. This is a pro forma document before us. There is no presentation. Does the committee have any questions for staff on this item? And I see no questions or comments. So is the report carried? Carried, thank you. There are no in-camera items. There has been an information previously distributed concerning designation refusals for fall 2023, and there are no presentations on that item. Are there any notices of motions? Seeing none, we did not receive any prior. Are there any inquiries? Seeing none. Under other business, there is a planning circulation for an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment concerning 945 and 1015 Bank Street. Is there any other business? Seeing none. On adjournment, is the motion carried? Carried. Thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. The next meeting is scheduled for Monday,